Hi, everyone. Welcome to Descriptive Analysis of Quantitative Data. You've done a little bit of this before last semester, but I'm here to give you some more detailed help in thinking through this. So I actually recommend that you watch this. You might even want to watch this before you create your survey and then watch it again after you've gathered your data. And this image I felt like was a good image for what happens when you analyze and bring together your quantitative data. It goes from totally messy and chaotic and you have no idea what's going on to very neat and clean and analyzed. So the first thing I want to talk about is taking a focus group interview and creating a survey out of that, since several of you are doing that. Remember. So always, of course, the first thing to think about is your research question. That should be second nature by now. So what is your research question? And then from your research question and the literature as well, and the theory and the literature, but also maybe some of the things your focus group folks said, you want to start with a list of constructs. And we talked about constructs last semester. These are conceptual categories that you're interested in. So in the case of someone studying the relationship between administrators and teachers, they might be interested in 4 conceptual categories: trust, collaboration, distributed leadership, and a sense of support. So that's my student Heather's 4 conceptual categories, mostly from the literature, but also a little bit from talking to people. So as you code your focus group, you're going to be looking for those specific constructs. You'll probably start putting buckets together for those constructs. If you already have those constructs from the literature, you can put them in a priori. You might also have some emerging constructs, all right? So if Heather was coding her data from her focus group, she might say, okay, this quote is something about support, this quote is something about distributed leadership, so she'd be putting them in the buckets. Then you construct questions based on those main constructs and the points that people make in their in the interview. So if it's distributed leadership, and a lot of teachers were talking about how it's frustrating to them when principals don't come to them to ask for advice about students, right? So maybe a question might be, what's frustrating to you about communication with the principal? And then you have A, B, C, D, and a lot of different options, all right? And it's from your focus group that you're gonna get those options. So the question, what's frustrating to you, came out of like, oh yeah, this is something teachers talked a lot about, different frustrations. And then what are the different frustrations they talked about? They might have talked about lack of communication from the administrator. They might have talked about the administrator's lack of knowledge. They might have talked about lack of time to meet, right? So maybe there's 3 or 4. So here's a different example. One of the questions I often ask teachers is, what are the barriers to science education? Now, I might have gotten from the literature, accountability is a barrier, lack of materials is a barrier, but when I did a focus group, something new came out. Science specialist teachers teach science, so I don't have to. So that's something that like I wouldn't have known from the literature. It came out of the focus group, and that's why we do a focus group, to create a survey, is so that we make sure we have all the potential options and all the potential questions. Okay, so you can do this process both as you create a survey and after you create a survey, all right? So this kind of either or. Thinking about constructs, the first thing you want to have separated out is your demographic and descriptive information. So these are things like years in the job, their ethnicity, the degree, whatever you think might be an important predictor. These are often used as predictors in your data. So they're used to predict, for example, the relationship between administrators and teachers, or they're used to predict the degree to which they think accountability is a barrier in science education. So for example, a demographic variable I often use is the school's API, at least in the past, of accountability, right? Their accountability scores. I use that to predict the degree to which they teach science education. All right, so that's a predictor. It's a demographic variable of the school, and it is used to predict how much they actually teach, because usually if they have lower test scores, they teach science education less. All right, then you want to really think about all your questions, and again, clumping them into constructs. Usually there's 3 to 8 main constructs, and usually there are several items per construct, especially if they're multiple choice or Likert. You don't ever want to depend on one Likert item to measure a construct, because usually constructs are multifaceted, so you want to get at multiple angles of that construct. Now, if it's an open-ended question for that construct, sometimes it's just one question, all right? And then, so as you sort of like make your, figure out what's going on in your survey, you want to list which items, so which questions belong to that construct. Then you also want to write down, if it's a choice of 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, or 5, you want to write down what those are, right? So if it was years serving as a counselor, and the choices that the person had was 1 to 2, 3 to 5, etc., but the way the survey downloads it is just 1, 2, 3, 4, you want to write down in your survey code book exactly what that means. And then for each construct, you need to write a definition of the construct. And remember, we did that last semester. You each had a construct you were responsible for, and you wrote a definition about it, referring to the literature. Okay, so I have some examples for you. So this is a student that I had last year. So student background questions. What year? This needed a little bit of editing, but what year are you here at East Bay, and what is your major? So these are demographic questions. These might be used as predictors. Then there's a construct of student experience. Give examples of what have been positive in your university and examples of what have been negative. That's some open-ended questions that she's going to code to understand experience. And then there's questions that are program specific to a particular program. What influenced your decision to enroll in this program? Why do you feel the program is important for African American students? And then finally, student need questions. How would a dedicated space on campus benefit you? What would you like to see in a space to support your experience here? So you can see these are actually almost all open-ended questions, but you can still clump them into constructs for your analysis. Here's another example from a former student. These are demographic questions. How many years have you been in education? How many years have you been serving as a school counselor? And remember, these are going to download as this one, 1 to 2 years will be the number 1. 3 to 5 years will be the number 2. 6 to 10 will be the number 3. So you need a code book where you have this question, and then you have 1 equals 1 to 2 years, 2 equals 3 to 5 years. Or else when you get your data, you're going to be like, oh, 1, does that equal 1 year? Believe me, it's very confusing. And then now we've got a construct, right? This has to do with the importance of reaching out to groups based on ethnicity, right? So we've got 3 questions having to do with this construct. We've got a Likert question, we've got kind of a yes or no question, and then we've got an open-ended question. Okay, I want to show you one other example. This is Heather Ferguson's, my current dissertation student, so you have heard a little bit about her work. So you see here in her survey, she has got, I'm going to start at the top here. Okay, so she's got some demographic questions, right? So your current site, how many years you've been a special education teacher, and how many years you've worked for this site, all right? Then her first construct, so those are demographics that she can use to predict different, to look at the data, right? So for example, what she ended up doing was dividing the data by site, because that was really important. The answers, for example, about administrator support, one of her constructs, differed greatly by site. One of the middle schools was fairly low, one was fairly high, all right? So then she has a construct called administrator support. And then she has some Likert questions. How well do you feel administration supports you in the following aspects? And then she's got 4 or 5 questions. Coaching and professional growth, addressing concerns about academic progress, collaborating with general education staff, etc. Now, she can then, because these are Likert questions, she can average them and treat them as one number, one construct, one idea that has multiple facets, right? So it's like a holistic idea of administrator support in all these different ways. That's one number for each teacher. It might be 4.25 or 3.2 or whatever, right? Or she could look at these individually and see if they differ, if there's a difference between how they feel supported in coaching and professional growth versus addressing concerns about student academic progress, all right? And she ended up doing both. She ended up looking at, like, if she looked across schools, she maybe lumped it together, but she also looked at differences between these items. Both can give you information. And then note here that she's got some open-ended questions, which will help her to unpack what's going on in what teachers say. All right, then her next construct, site administrator relationships. All right, she's got, again, several Likert questions. And these questions are from, she actually got these from someone else's survey, and that's okay. Like sometimes you're like, oh, I really want to understand teacher trust of administrators. And lo and behold, there's already a survey out there that measures that, that's been validated. So it's actually great to draw some questions from other surveys sometimes, all right? And again, she can average between all of these, right? These are all different facets of the same construct, or she can look at them individually. Okay, and the same with site and administrator collaboration and with distributed leadership decisions. So that's an idea of how to create constructs. So I've gone over this before a couple of times, but when you're ready to get the data ready, and most survey instruments should download just like this, your respondent should be on the left side going down, and then each item should be going across. The items are going to usually download as the full questions, but you will have to insert like kind of a code name for each question in the column. Otherwise, you can't really read the entire question, and it's very messy, and it's actually hard to analyze. But make sure you have again, a code book that has the name of the, kind of the top of the column. What does years YRS teacher mean? Oh, it's this question about how many years you've been a teacher. What does this for mean? Oh, it means actually 15 to 20 years, right? If they put 4, it means 15 to 20 years. I have a code book somewhere that says that. Once you get all of your data into that kind of a table in Excel, you want to delete any folks who did not answer the question. So like often I'll get someone who started but didn't answer most of the questions. Clean up any numbers that are problematic, especially in open-ended questions. Teachers you may be looking for a number, like how many years have you been a teacher? And they put 24, but they write it out. Or they put, I don't know, 24 to 26. And so then you need to replace it with a number 25, like if you're going to actually use it as a number. If you have a construct that measures several items and you want to average across that construct, you need to create a column in which you do that. And then some may download as a percentage or a Likert, or they may download in the wrong format. Be sure that it's in numerical form in the end. So that's another thing. Like a lot of times it might download actually as strongly disagree, agree, strongly agree. Like it'll download the word. You need to replace that with the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from your Likert scale. Okay, so hopefully this video, I know this video covers a lot of kind of the process of creating and analyzing a survey. I want to, I want you to come back to this video again and again, and check as you go through what you're doing, okay? The final thing I'm gonna talk about is analyzing open-ended questions. It's like qualitative coding, but it's kind of different because usually you do it by question and you list the major responses that emerge. So, for example, this question, what helped with students engaging in scientific reasoning? The teachers might have said things like, it really helped when they had to revise the lab. And another teacher might have written, you know, I think it helps when I make them take my comments and make revisions, right? So even though those are slightly different, they both have to do with revising the lab. Okay, so for each one of those, I make a tally, I put a category, revising the lab, and then I make a tally point. And then I put a quote that that kind of exemplifies that particular category. All right, so or even 2 or 3 quotes, so that you can actually, and this becomes such a great grounding for your findings, because you can say things like, most of the teachers, or a good portion of the teachers, talked about revising the lab as being helpful for facilitating student reasoning. For example, one teacher said, and then you have the quote. All right, that's it for now. Also, of course, draw on some of the materials from last semester.